Muskoka, when I was a child, it was, to me, as a kid growing up in Montreal, the sort of the true north, strong, free, and wild. And the way we lived was pretty primitive. The cottages had no electricity or running water. There was no road. We spent all our time in boats. And there were very few cottages around.
All my cousins were here that lived on each side of me for about 1.5 miles of shoreline, and we were all related. And it meant so much to me all my 72 years of coming up here.
I loved Muskoka, and if I drove to Muskoka, fine, but if I drove other places, I hated it. And I never wanted to leave, and I used to hide in a tree or something when it was time to go home.
We all had put so much into it, right from the time we could walk. We'd done our chores, and we'd started to put things together, and we'd played, and latter years, we'd built stone walls like this and made the paths, and the mothers certainly had done in their time the same type of work, so they were all keen to get back. They'd grown up with each other, and like anything else, if you put a lot into a place, you have memories of it and enjoyment, and you look forward to coming back every year.
It's terribly important. And all I can say is, John, I think it's in our bones, you know, this attraction. It's hard to explain.
So who are these people, and what's all this fuss about a place called Muskoka? Well, they're my relatives, and like myself, all related to my great-great-aunt Euphemie Mackenzie, who more than 100 years ago purchased a strip of shoreline on Lake Joseph in a region called Muskoka, which is approximately a 2-hour drive, depending on traffic of course, from Toronto, Ontario. They spent every summer of their childhood in Muskoka, bonding with each other and with the land, and to this day spend their winters dreaming about and hoping for one more summer in Muskoka. Their memories of their youth and the love they have for each other is what this story is all about.
Say just halfway to heaven, you find a cottage small, just halfway to heaven, beside a garden wall where butterflies are flirting, out in the sun, behind the kitchen curtain, someone's cooking.
Every morning we had chores before we went off and played.
What type of chores would you have to
Well,
do?
I had
boat.
to, well, the water, and then the cleaning
Oh, you
of
yes.
the lamps,
lamps. Oh, we
for the
all had
kerosene lamps,
Everybody had to
and
clean
bringing in
lamps.
kindling, and then helping with the ice out of the ice house.
Oh, did you even get stuck with that, did you? I thought that
Sure.
was all the males had to do.
Oh,
that.
no, I was often
the
stuck with
twins
that.
had-
We didn't have electricity, of course, and all the work was done in the boathouse. So Mother used to bring down the clothes, and one of my chores were to get on the top of that washing machine, which was bought from T.E. Eaton, I remember that, and you grasped the handle, and the bottom of it was serrated bottom, which coupled into a serrated bottom of the rest of the washer containing the water and soap suds. And for 15 minutes, I went back and forward. Occasionally would just stop and turn over the blanket or the sheet and go again. Because if we didn't do the chores, which we were all assigned to, we wouldn't get our nickel a week.
I remember my brother Massey being sent down to get spring water, and we heard a terrified shout from him on his way back, and we all ran down wondering what awful thing had happened to him. And there was a big snake, it was about that big around, about that long, lying across the path, and there were bushes on each side of the path, so he couldn't get by it. And my brother John, who was then, I suppose, about 12 or younger, ran and got some firewood and began flinging it at the snake and missed it all the time. Then my sister went up and got the axe and strode up to the snake and chopped it in half. And that solved that. But my brother apparently had nightmares since he was a child about snakes and has just about undid him.
You know, everyone has someone who in some way influenced their life as a child. For all in Muskoka who knew her, this is my great Aunt Kitty, who thought of herself as the matriarch of our colony.
We would have to do the chores for my great Aunt Kate at Killiecrankie. And my cousin Tom and I were getting in ice one time, and she had an ice refrigerator that opened at the top. So as little kids, we were 10 or 11, I guess, one of us had to stand on a chair and we'd get the ice tongs around the lump of ice and shift it up to the other one. He'd have to lift it over the top. It fell. And with a terrible crash in the floor, unfortunately missed our toes because we were in bare feet. And Aunt Kate came storming around the veranda saying, "What are you boys trying to do? Break my veranda floor?" With no concern about us at all. She was a tough old character in many respects.
Anyway, Aunt Kitty was terribly important in our lives.
Oh, was she ever?
Terrifically important. She cared about all of us. She tried to teach us all manners and how to cook and how to do things right.
Yes,
She was marvelous, and she played bridge with us, and she did everything.
Well, I can remember arriving up, all 6 or 7 of us, and coming over and sitting around this table having dinner. She gave us our first meal as we arrived in Muskoka.
Right,
Well, she's
right.
done
Well,
several
she was so
She was so
capable.
kind and capable to everybody.
She was so fair. And if your table manners weren't right, she'd tell you, "That's no way to hold your knife, Helen."
But we loved it, you see. If you get somebody that gives you leads or gives you direction, you like that better than people that don't. And, well, she taught me all kinds of cooking. And, oh, gosh, I checked on her. She stayed with me in the country. I checked on her in her old age. I used to go over twice a day to see if she was alive. She was usually snoring on the porch.
Well, as I said, sometimes we were out till after midnight, and I guess no doubt we would then sit out in the Wed's boathouse and talk until all hours. And I guess we must have disturbed her one night because I started to walk home along the lower path, and there was a shout from up the hill that it was past the time that we should be in bed. And anyway, I guess I decided now was the time to let her know that she wasn't going to continually rule the colony. Anyway, I called back and said that I was reached the great age of 18, and I think I must be able to decide when it was proper time for me to go to bed. I guess I also must have said I'm sorry that we woke her up. But never again did I. She never mentioned it again, and was just as perfectly friendly the next time I saw her. But I never had any more calls in the middle of the night.
Spending time in the water was a major activity of summers on Lake Joseph. As you can see, my relatives were as concerned as you and I might be of making the correct fashion statement. But some folks thought that Aunt Sylvia took this a little too far.
And there's Sylvia's rubber bathing suit.
I know, isn't that
Oh,
wonderful?
where's that?
Where's that?
Oh, dear heart. It's so silly. It isn't so silly. That's all right. My father brought it up. I don't know why. Father was very ahead of the times. He was the one that wanted the Babin Court. He wanted everyone to keep busy. He couldn't stand people doing nothing in Muskoka, which a lot of people did.
I suppose it was something new like the first bikini was, and bathing suits up till then weren't very revealing. There weren't much in the way of stretch fabrics the way there are today. So this was something that really fitted very tightly, and I guess was the subject of a lot of conversation. In those days it was thought to be very sexy. It couldn't have been very pleasant to wear.
So anyway, he brought up this suit. How he ever heard about it, I don't know, and I wore it. And everyone whistled and hummed, and, there was a great fuss about it. And probably the old girls thought it was dreadful. I don't know, it wasn't. I wasn't very old. I wasn't very voluptuous at that point.
She hadn't anticipated that it would tear rather easily. Now, I'm 4 or 5 years younger than she, so I wasn't teasing her about it all the time. And I do remember some of the others sort of snapping the leg of her bathing suit or pulling the shoulder strap. And I think by the end of July, it was covered with tape, but it was quite unsightly.
Well, we were all hoping it would split, but it never did. It should have. It never did.
She never got over that thing. Anywhere she turned, the boys were going, pulling that rubber bathing suit and go snap. I've never seen another one to this day. But that was the one rubber bathing suit I'll never forget, and neither will she.
For my relatives, fun and games in the early 1930s were very creative and very personal. Why? Because no one during the Depression had any money.
There's a photograph here of one of the masquerades. And I think this is one we had at the house in Hurrell's Field. And there are a lot of people, from Doug as Cupid. Here he is.
Yeah,
and,
there's a date in the back.
Here's your father, Ian, and as I remember, he came dressed in a grass skirt. I don't know why I remember this so clearly. And a grass skirt and a brassiere made out of tin cans with a wig. And somebody
Sounds
asked him
more like Teddy Carey.
what he was supposed to be.
My father.
And his reply was Rin Tin Tin.
I was a bug in a striped bathing suit, and she made wings, and I had a bathing cap that was dotted, and she put little wires out there too, and I got first prize. My poor twin brothers, Aunt Aid made up as the Gold Dust Twins, and they were covered in black charcoal. And they went to the party. They couldn't sit down or do anything but what they didn't leave a mark. So needless to say, they had to go up the next day and clean up the veranda. Wherever they had been, they had left a mark. But it was rather hard on the children.
I mean, actually, and all the stuff we were wearing as masquerade, you know, we wore funny clothes up here, and nobody had, well, the ladies, the mothers all had fresh cotton dresses on every afternoon, but nobody really was dressed up in Muskoka in those days.
I'm looking over a four-leaf clover that I overlooked before. One leaf is sunshine, the second is rain, the third one the roses that grow in the lane.
One of the many things we did when we were small is invented various diving helmets, starting with the big pails of water, which held about a gallon and a half, and through them, in order to get air to the surface, we soldered on handles to pull it down over our head. Then, by an extension of rubber hoses and tire pump, we kept this rubbery smelling air forcing down to us, which we were about 12, 15 foot underwater.
You had this aluminum tank over your head with a melted glass, and it got all steamed up because you were in it, so you had to keep spitting. And the best way to keep spitting was to have peppermint so it smelt better, because the old tubes were pretty awful.
Finally, my cousin, Bumpy Bell, he was one of the very few families that had money, and he had a real good one. It came over the chest down about here, leaded. You had a face mask, which you didn't have to spit into and wipe off in order to see out of. And in that thing, we had a little push-pull handle motor where we really pumped air down to him from the dock, and we went down in 20, 25 foot of water. And normally that thing, if you didn't lean too far forward, where you tipped over because all the weight was here, even though it was underwater, you could have almost drowned in that thing.
You know there's no need explaining that one remaining is someone that I adore. I'm looking over a pretty little four-leaf clover that I overlooked before.
Everybody had wash tubs. So if they weren't utilized, then we kids took the wash tubs down to the lake and got in same awkwardly, and hopefully it wasn't too rough, paddled the wash clubs all up and down the colony, carefully keeping out of deep water. Because if you've ever even imagined, and a lot of us did this, if we had some waves that came in, they sank. Now, because they're metal, of course. Now, if you ever tried getting a wash tub out of the bottom of the lake, even though it's just 5 foot deep, maybe, or 6 foot, it's a heck of a job.
The Port Carling Regatta actually had a race for the tubs, and I can't remember whether we ever won anything at that, but certainly we went in it with dire warnings not to lose the tubs, because the water was so deep there that if you did dump, you'd never get the tub back again.
The boys did that. I think they've sunk a few wash tubs, too. Yeah, probably. Our kids will discover them someday, probably.
There was more to fun and games at Muskoka than simply having a good time. When it came to regattas, my family was extremely competitive. For years, our paddlers were the scourge of all the lakes in the Muskokas.
We were able to paddle this canoe much faster than the heavy, big, hefty fellows in a canvas-covered canoe. So that we won it 3 years in a row, and I guess this is one of the paddles, which was a prize. That paddles must go back to when I was at least 18, so it's over 60 years old. And I don't think it's hardly ever been used, because in general, we in the colony were pretty successful in the regattas and usually came home with 2 or 3 paddles each year.
We had big races off at the end of the Killiecrankie Dock, which was much longer at that time, much longer, another 25 feet. And the swimming used to take place between there and about halfway down the dock. We had a little landing place. And whether kids about the same age or within 2 or 3 years of each other used to race, swim, and dive, and all the different aquatic races. But that was a lot of fun. We had our own medals on first, second, and third. And we had more fun because at that time there must have, in the whole colony, would you say 25 or 30 of us?
Yes.
Huh?
Oh, I would think so.
Closets came down.
And the
closets.
parents, you know,
Yeah.
everybody was on the job.
My first participation in the Killiecrankie Regatta was in the swimming race, and there were 3 of us, Tom, my cousin Tom, and my cousin Nan. And they tried to start the race in the usual manner with a starting pistol, but I must have been 5 or 6, something like that, and could barely just learning how to swim, and we were scared to jump into such deep water, so that they decided that the only way to get us all in the water at the same time was to have our fathers throw us in. So on the starting signal, the 3 fathers threw us kids into the water. And I can remember sort of surfacing and nose full and everything else and dog paddling to the end. And I was talking to Nan, who was one of the competitors in this several years ago, about it. And she said, I remember that clearly, and I won. I beat you 2 boys.
They weren't so hot. They weren't very impressive.
Well, if the regattas didn't impress you, the weekly arrival of the supply boat certainly would, especially if you were a small child.
We all ran up the minute we heard the whistle. It came from Crane Island over here to Killiecrankie, so that you knew we were all running along the shore to be there in time for the supply boat to arrive. But the children all had to line up and sit on Killiecrankie steps. That was an order.
Our mothers and dads and we kids had to stand on the steps of Killiecrankie until Aunt Kitty came down in grand manner from Killiecrankie, the big octagonal house that still stands, built in 1886, came down the steps and onto the supply boat. And when she was safely aboard the supply boat, then the rest of our parents could get aboard. And the last ones in were the boys and girls allowed to go to spend their nickel, or if they had a rich family, 10 cents for their candy bars or whatever.
And there was a rather wimpy captain, we thought, because one time when the wind was going in a different direction, he had to circle around and land the ship heading south. But he didn't quite make it and hit the boat at about hit the dock rather, at about a 45-foot angle, and we were all standing on it, and there were boos and jeers and heckles and all sorts of things. So we really set out to take advantage of him, and we were not supposed to be in the upper deck, but there were so many of us, we were like flies crawling all over. And we would climb up in the upper deck and then up onto the roof of his cabin and either dive or jump off. And the poor guy nearly went nuts with all these kids just making his life absolutely miserable. And I can remember learning that when one was diving from such a height, to put one's hands out in front and break the water instead of letting your head do it.
Remember way back when you were 10 and I was 11 or so. I said that I was your beau. That made you happy, I know. Then again, later when you were sweet 16, charming Cinderella, I was still your fella. You were still my queen.
Well, I remember going up the lakes, and a lot of times we used to go up to the Coriolis. And
Oh, your romance is coming in, Douglas.
That's
There
right.
you are, darling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved that. And Coriolis had an upstairs where John Coriel used to play like
Eddie Duchin.
Eddie Duchin.
That's right.
But all the bigger boys took over my girl, so I was left with nothing but her older sister, 10 years older. But you know, I didn't really care after a while.
I'm sure you didn't.
During the 30s, we had no motorboats, so that when the time came to start courting, it was always done in canoes and as a last resort in a rowboat. And my cousin and I, being the youngest really, we watched our older brothers take off almost every evening in the canoes, loaded with cushions and eiderdowns and all this sort of thing. And I must say, it stimulated one's erotic fantasies.
I guess there was courting going on around here, but very discreet.
I guess John and I used to paddle the boat out to the middle of the lake and then start it and then go up and join Bumpy and the group up the lake. And Mother and Dad couldn't hear the boat start, you see, once it started in the middle of the lake. And Bumpy's cabin, has anyone mentioned Bumpy's cabin? Well, it was a deer cabin up the lake. It was just great. And we used to group up there. And I think no drinking and no smoking. We did some smoking, but no drinking. But every now and then, the boys had candy or something, which I thought was rather filthy. But anyway, that's all we didn't do anything wrong. We just had a good time, all right?
Finally, I was old enough to screw up the courage to ask a girl to come out for a paddle. And as I remember, she was lovely. She was tall and blonde and very pleasant. And I went and picked her up. And again, I had the canoe filled with cushions and eiderdowns and great expectations. I really don't know of what. I was about 12 years old, I think. So we did indeed go for a paddle, and we must have paddled for about 4 or 5 straight hours.
Muriel and I used to take the rowboat, and we'd go out and putter around the lake and land at an island and do a little sparking. And I thoroughly enjoyed that because I was just a little 15-year-old boy, or 16. And that was my first real getting to know you with the feminine sex, and I loved it very much, and I remember it today.
Unbeknownst to me, there was a sloping rock that was about a 16th of an inch under the water. So we were paddling along, and suddenly this terrible scraping noise at the bottom of the canoe, and we were high and dry. But that was a night I will never forget because it was a wonderful August night with a clear, clear sky and the stars, just thousands of them. And it was the time of year for falling stars and for the northern lights. And it was incredibly beautiful.
As the sun sets on Muskoka, it also sets on simpler times. But for my dad, Aunt Helen, Uncle Doug, Aunt Sylvia, Uncle Don, Aunt Mary, and the rest of us, those times will always live on through their memories of Muskoka.
It was an idyllic childhood insofar as I was concerned. I don't remember anything bad about it, except for one thing. The cars used to come to across, there was no road here. So the cars came and were parked across the lake. And we were always listening, everybody had their individual toot. And your Uncle Tom persuaded me one time in the evening that it was your grandfather arriving unexpectedly. And of course it was strictly forbidden to cross the lake in the rowboat or the canoe. Nonetheless, we set out. And I can remember seeing my grandparents coming along in the putter boat. And you could feel impending doom. I knew a disaster was just about to descend on us, and indeed it was. And I can remember trying to hide under the deck of the rowboat, which was about that deep. And no, we got caught. And nothing was said, because we always went over to see Granny and Grandpa in the evening. Nothing was said till I got home. And then I was really dressed down by my mother, laid down on my stomach on the bed and spanked with her slipper, and I'll never forget that. But that was the only sort of rough thing I can ever remember. It was a real paradise for a child.
Just halfway to heaven, beside a garden wall where butterflies are flirting, out in the sun, behind the kitchen curtain. Someone's cooking while she's looking out of the window to hear that old refrain. I whistle every time that I walk down the lane. Then she meets me halfway, halfway up that pathway that's halfway to heaven.
I can't tell you anything. I can't tell you anything. I really can't.